Hey, it's YoBo, day 239 of Life According to YoBo, and the 16th episode of the life and death of Mattie Bertha Canton Bowie. My grandmother, I promise y'all, I thought this would be done in 2 messages, maybe 3, and how we get up to 16. But when you look at things that people have experienced in life, when you sit down, you begin to talk about it, you begin to decipher it, you never know what's buried in there. One thing I have discovered in all this, I had no idea that my cousins on the Canton side did not know how we were related on the Canton side. I'm just now discovering that my cousins did not know that their grandparents had another sister who was my grandmother. How the devil they thought we were related, I don't know. But I'm shocked to discover that nobody knew. I'm telling you, all y'all that's mad because people are in your business, you can say what you want to say about Grandma Lula. She knew how to keep people out of her business. Let me say this too about Grandma Lula. As people said, I feel so sorry for your mother. Why would your grandmother forbid them from talking about their mother? One reason I believe is that they were already traumatized. And my sister Gail and I had this discussion when I saw her on the East Coast. And Gail had mentioned she didn't want them to be stigmatized. You know, your mother was killed. You know how people do. They want to sit down. They want to ask you questions. They want to get all in your business. Another thing that I can appreciate Grandma Lula doing from her not allowing them to talk about it is that since they didn't talk about it, they couldn't use this as an excuse. Have you ever seen people? Here's an example. I was talking to a man, he was 32 years old, didn't trust his wife, just didn't trust her. And he was telling me his side of the story. He said, well, you have to understand, I have abandonment issues from when I was a childhood. My parents separated and I didn't see them, and I was raised by my grandmother, and on and on and on. I said, dude, when are you going to get over it? You're 32. You're using this as an excuse in your marriage. If you don't get over it now, you're going to be 62 years old, still talking about something that happened to you when you were a child. If that's you, if you still can't get over something that happened to you when you were a child, go seek a licensed professional counselor. Get you some help, because sometimes you just can't get over it, okay? Mama, she decides I'm ready to get over it, so she's going to seek some help. She goes back to Texas. In the previous day's message, find my notes here, the previous day's message, we talked about her being with her Aunt Leachie. Aunt Leachie and Uncle Tud. Those two know something. Just to back up a little bit, in this discussion Mama had with Aunt Leachie and Uncle Tud, she says they never took flowers to their mother's grave. She told her uncle, you know, we didn't go to her funeral. And our dad never took us to her grave. We never asked because we were instructed by our grandma Lula Earls Canton to never discuss our mother. Now Mama's back in Texas. Her Aunt Leachie, an aunt by marriage, and also my daddy's cousin, Aunt Leachie has now taken Mama under her wing. I'm going to read something else to you from the journal. Mama's recollections of her childhood. She talks about screaming when she was 6 years old. There were times when I did scream and cry. My little legs became too weak to walk. I would fall on my face wherever I was. They, her family, would put me in the bed. I would cry myself to sleep. In the times that Mama fell out, cried herself to sleep as a 6-year-old, Aunt Leachie saw all that because she was living in Grandma Lula's house. Now as Mama returns back to Geneva 60 years later, Aunt Leachie is still alive. And she's looking at this woman searching for answers. Aunt Leachie did everything she could do, except for one thing. She still had one more secret she wasn't telling. I don't know if I told you about them going to the cemetery, and when Mama ordered the headstone, the man from the monument company said, "Okay, where's the grave?" And Mama said, "I don't know where she's buried." He said, "Well, I tell you what, just walk around, see which one feel like your mama." So Mama said she just walked around to see which one felt like her mama. And that also coincides with the story my niece Shannon told, who remembered being 9 years old and Mama walking through a cemetery as though she was trying to think some things through. Well, Mama finally landed on the grave. Mama said, "This one right here, this feels like my mama." So they ordered the headstone. On a later trip, I went back with Mama to see the headstone for the first time. And so I remember walking into the graveyard. You turn right, and I count down 7 graves. And then my grandmother was the seventh or the 8th, something like that. Also during that trip, as we were still seeking answers, we went to see Mama's cousin Arvetta, who was the oldest of all of Mama's first cousins on the Bowie side. At this time, she was 94, still living by herself in Pineland. We would go see her, and I asked her one day, I said, "Cousin Arvetta, the graves in the front of the cemetery, do you know who's buried there?" And I should have written it down. But remember, Mama walked through the cemetery and landed on the grave that felt like her mother, an unmarked grave, the 7th one. Cousin Arvetta sat there. She named off everyone who was buried there. Well, there's this one, and then Uncle so-and-so, then Aunt so-and-so, then Uncle so-and-so, then Aunt so-and-so, then Cousin so-and-so, and then Aunt Mattie. The grave that Mama selected, no, she got confused. She said Aunt Mattie, she said it's either in that 7th one or the 8th one. She was naming off the people there. But that is the exact grave that my mother selected, not knowing where her mother was buried. So I just want to share that with y'all, okay? Okay, they end up going back home. I don't know where my daughter and niece were. But by now, Aunt Leachie has done all that Aunt Leachie can do. And they're in the house one night. And let me go back to Mama's notes here. And this particular night, Aunt Leachie has made the decision that Uncle Tud is going to tell Mama what he knows. Up until this point, I don't believe Uncle Tud and Aunt Leachie have had a conversation about his sister, her sister-in-law, my grandmother. I don't believe they've had a conversation since 1931. No one has discussed her. Whatever happened that night, they just didn't talk about it. Okay, so right here, Aunt Leachie told her husband, Uncle Tud, Mama's brother, I'm reading from the journal, tell her, talk to her. That is why she has convulsions. She wants to know about her mother. And there, Uncle Tud sat silent, not saying a word. Because no one had ever talked about this. And those of you who know my Aunt Leachie, you know she ain't no joke. If she says Tud, tell her, he don't have any choice but to tell her. But now he's sitting with his sister's daughter. Something happened that night that they hadn't talked about. He's looking at her. And Aunt Leachie is steadily telling him, tell her, Tud, tell her. Tell her, Tud, she needs to know. She needs to know, Tud, tell her. And this went on, and Mama's sitting there, she's wondering, tell me what? Tell me what? Tell her, Tud. He sits there with his head down. Tell her, Tud. This in my imagination, okay? That's why I'm telling the story. Because I know ain't Leachie and I know Uncle Tud. Tell her, Tud. He takes a deep breath. He looks at his sister's daughter. And he said, we believe there was a third person. Mom is stunned. And she's confused. A third person? When Alice killed my mother, a third person, and all of a sudden, it makes sense. Mama screamed, "Oh no!" He looked at her, he said, "Oh yes." We thought it was better to have one parent to love than none. Y'all come back tomorrow for more of Life According to YoBo. Oh no! Oh yes. You chew on that. Meet me back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.